No talking amongst anybody in the audience. All conversation will be directed to the board, one at a time. Okay. Secretary, please read the application to the record.
The applicant is Coventry Solar LLC. The owner is James Dana Pettigrew and Shari Lee Pettigrew. Location of property is 314, lot 7552 Railroad Avenue. Zone is RR5. Existing use is single-family home. Proposed use is same with 1 megawatt ground-mounted solar installation. Applicant is seeking a special use permit to install a 1 megawatt ground-mounted solar installation.
Is the applicant here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the applicant is here. My name is Scott Spear, and I am the attorney for the applicant and the owner, and will be presenting the case this evening. And I've seen some people asking about the name Spear, and you're right. My father was involved in the town for many years.
That's what I just asked John.
Yeah, I could see the
You were
whispering.
Ray's
Yeah.
son. I miss him.
Great man.
Oh, thank
He
you.
was a great man.
Thank you very
Are
much.
you going to give testimony, Mr. Spear?
I don't believe I'll be testifying. I have
Do you
several
wish to get
witnesses.
sworn in?
I would like to be sworn in now.
Okay, you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in front of this board?
Yes, I do, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name again is Scott Spear. I'm here on behalf of Coventry Solar LLC, the applicant. The owners of the property, Dana and Sherry Pellegrew, are also here this evening. This is a special use application to install a solar array on the property that the secretary already read into the record. This is a 1 megawatt solar facility. To get your minds into the idea of how big solar facilities are, this falls on the very low end of the scale. I know that some people have different ideas of what large and small is. This tends to be a very small facility, and our experts will talk to you about that as well. This matter was before the Planning Commission in Coventry 4 times, and the application before the Planning Commission was approved. We have a conditional master plan approval and a favorable recommendation to the zoning board asking you to look upon our application for special use permit favorably. The 4 hearings we had before the Planning Commission were very spirited. There was a large segment of the population that came and offered a great deal of testimony and raised virtually every issue that the human mind could think of involving one of these types of facilities, and all of the issues were addressed adequately to the Planning Commission by all of the experts that I brought this evening. That will go through many of the same issues. There is some crossover between the planning regulations and the zoning regulations, so we'll be talking about some of the same things that we presented to the Planning Commission. Our goal is to adequately educate you on all of these issues and to demonstrate that we can construct this site and make the use of it compatible with surrounding properties. I have with me this evening, for record-keeping purposes, the green cards and the mailing receipts for notices to the abutters, and I can hand these to the clerk, the secretary of the planning department. I will hand them to the planning department. The Planning Commission's decision granting the master plan approval has been recorded in the land evidence records. I mentioned earlier that they gave us a favorable recommendation to you. I'd like to very quickly show you what the stipulations were in their decision, so that you understand that if you're inclined to grant the special use permit, you understand that this matter goes back to the Planning Commission again, because the Planning Commission still has their fingertips on this project, and there are some other features to it that we need to bring back to them when we go to the next stage of approval. And just so you know what those are, I think it's handy. We have to get the special use permit. We need to get approval from the Western Coventry Fire District, and we'll talk about that this evening. We need to develop an emergency action plan, which we will talk about. We have to have DEM approvals. We'll address that this evening. Soil erosion and sediment control plans, we'll discuss that. We do not have to have a landscape plan certified by an architect, but we'll be addressing landscaping issues before you, just like we did with them. We need to have a decommissioning plan. This is a plan that demonstrates if the facility is no longer used, how does the use get taken off of the property? The Planning Commission wants us to do that, and we'll be presenting that to them when we go back. We're going to get input from the Rhode Island Historic Preservation and Heritage Commission, because there's a little sliver of the property that's in their jurisdiction, and we have someone here that will be addressing that this evening. And we are going to have specific criteria on the driveway that we worked out with the Planning Commission, and we have to maintain that criteria, and that will be part of our presentation this evening. And there's some design criteria for the driveway as well that we can talk about. This evening, I'm going to have 3 witnesses, and we will try to keep their testimony short, concise, and brief for sake of time. The first witness is going to be Alan Benavides. He's the project manager and a civil engineer that will give the broad scope view of the application. He'll put up some demonstrative evidence on the board so that you can see the site, and he'll walk you through all of the boundaries, the perimeters, and talk to you about the application. Joe McHugh is an environmental scientist, and he's going to talk about all of the environmental issues on this massive piece of rural property and the impacts of the use and how it might affect the plants that are there, animal species, and that sort of thing. Jamie Miles is a real estate expert. He's going to talk about compatibility of this project with surrounding land uses and its consistency with the comprehensive plan. Alan Clapp is from NexAmp, which is the parent company that owns Coventry Solar LLC, and he's here to answer any questions that may surface about this industry and how the industry works and how solar panel operations work and how energy is generated, if you have questions about those sorts of things. So that is the outline of the presentation, just to help focus you on what it is that we have to do this evening in order to convince you that we're entitled to a special use permit, is we have to address all of the standards in your special use ordinance. And these are the same standards that the doggy kennel had to establish. It's a set standard of criteria that everyone has to establish for a special use permit. And as we walk through those standards, we will be asked to jump into some other articles of the zoning ordinance that are part of that standard. And that deals with landscaping, signage, parking, and industrial performance standards. And we're going to touch on all of those through these experts as we walk through those criteria. And then there's a special ordinance that you have that only applies to solar projects. It's a special project criteria, and that's Article 21. And I know that the Secretary, I think, was copying that earlier this evening and handed each one of you a copy of that, so that when we have our expert address that, you'll have that in front of you, and we will just be walking right through that and checking off all of those criteria to show you that we've adequately addressed all of those. So if you don't have any questions of me at this time, I'd like to call our first witness, who is Alan Benavides, who's an expert witness. And I don't know your practice, Mr. Chairman, on whether you want me to add some background to his criteria to have him testify as an expert.
Yes,
okay, thank you. Mr. Benavides, you'd be sworn in.
Please give your full name and address.
My name is Alan Benavides, and I'm a vice president with Woodard & Curran. We have offices at 33 Broad Street in Providence, Rhode Island.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth in front of this board?
I do.
Mr. Benavides, could you please tell the board what licenses or special certifications you have in the area of engineering?
Sure. I have a professional engineer's
Excuse me a
license.
minute. Can you people in the back here,
No.
Not too well.
Sorry.
you have to speak right close to the mic, please?
Thank you.
I always need to be reminded. Thank you.
Lift it up if you want. Yeah,
There we go.
Right close.
Yeah. So I have a professional engineer's license in the state of Rhode Island as well as a number of other states. I'm NCEES certified, which is another certification as well. I'm a licensed site professional, which is an environmental professional as well.
And how many years have you been licensed in that field?
Approximately 30.
And how much experience do you have in the permitting and design and facilities such as the one that's before the board this evening?
I do have a copy of my CV if the board would like to look at it. I've been involved in 30 solar projects, design, permitting, engineering, and ultimately construction. Of the 30, probably 12 have been built. For various reasons, they're still in the permitting phase, or others didn't go forward. So I've done a lot of permitting, design associated with these kind of projects.
Unless you have any questions directed to his qualifications, I'd ask that he be considered an expert by the board.
Yeah, can you just give a copy of your CV to the secretary or to the planner?
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to accept the...
So moved.
Professional.
Second.
Motion's made second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Negatives?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, Mr. Benavides, would you please make the presentation?
Sure. What I'd like to do is first just give you an overview of the projects to kind of set the stage for what it looks like and the size and so forth, give you a little bit of background, and then I think what we'll do is walk through the standards that you all have to talk about my opinion that this project does meet those standards. So if you could, this is good. So what you're looking at is an overview of the project, and you'll see a red line. And that's the entirety of the parcel that the project is going to go on. It was referenced earlier as part of the introduction to the project. It's plat 314, lot 75. That parcel is 133 acres. And what we're proposing, as was talked about earlier, is a 1 megawatt solar array. So what that means is essentially a number of panels. They're going to be put there, approximately 3,000 panels. When you take the size of the panel, times the number of panels, it adds up to a megawatt. So that's what the project is. Just to give you a little background, what someone said earlier, the smallest projects I've worked on out of the 30 that I described is 0.5, a half a megawatt, and I'm working on one now that's 40 megawatts. So, this is, in the scheme of things, a relatively small project in terms of large-scale solar arrays. What you see here, and I'll show you a better detail of what the project is, those black lines that you see are essentially the panels and racks that make up the project. So you can see the size of the array as compared to the entirety of the parcel. The actual panels themselves, if you took the panels in terms of like a lot coverage type area, there's 1.38 acres of panels. So those occupy 1.04% of the parcel, very small percent of the parcel. We've got, if you take into account the actual spacing between the panels, it's about 3.7 acres that the panels occupy. The area of the fence, we'll talk about that later, the entirety of this solar array is fenced. So the array of the area of the fence is 4.78 acres, and that's only 3.59% of the overall lot. So as you can see, this array takes up a very small portion of the overall parcel. Could you go on to...
Excuse me, can I just ask for clarification? You said 1.38 acres of panels,
Correct.
and then you said 3.7 acres of panels. Can you
Correct.
tell me what the distinction between those?
Absolutely. So the first number that I gave you is if you looked at each panel and you took the area of the panel and then you took the number of panels that are there, then that would be the 1.38 acres.
Okay.
If you take the fact that there's spacing between rows, which we'll see in a second, then when you take the whole area, when you draw it around it, the area of the panels and the spacing between them is the larger number.
Okay, so the totality of the actual, what I would look at as a non-professional, as the solar panels, it's going to take up 3.7 acres of that property.
Okay, correct. Well, the entire, so that'll be the area of the solar panels. Then there's some area of clearing.
Right.
The entire project area, so there's a limit of work that you'll see on the drawings that is shown here. The entire limit of work, so everything that's going to be done, clearing or not clearing with the project area, is 9.45 acres or 7.11%. The reason I give the size of the panels, typically for lot coverage percentages, when, at least in my experience in testifying, that's what zoning typically uses when establishing lot coverage. So I typically include that.
Thank you.
So what you see here is the solar array, and you've got Railroad Avenue that's going along the top. And ultimately, those of you who are familiar with the area, it's really coming off of Lewis Farm Road. So what we've got here is it's showing the array. Those lines that are going horizontal, what those are, and it's hard to see really from any distance other than if you're standing in front of the screen, is that there's a series of small squares. Each one of the squares that you see on the plans that you've been submitted, each one of those are the solar panels. And you can see that there's racks. So the panels are installed on racks. There's 22 panels on each rack. The racks are next to each other, and you can see them aligned, and they're ultimately pointing in the southern direction because of the way the solar works. So those horizontal lines are the panels and racks that are associated with the project. You'll see that coming off the roadway, there's a proposed road that's going to be coming into the site. It'll be coming in, there'll be a roadway that's going to go down the middle. It's going to be essentially a gravel road, it won't be a paved road, and that'll be allowing access into the site between the panels, and ultimately there's space to be able to go around the panels. One of the things that I think is worth pointing out is there's an existing entrance to the site right now. What we initially proposed as part of concept plan to the planning board was to use the existing entrance and to come in off of that. We got feedback, we had a site meeting with the planning board. Based on that feedback, they've asked us to take the roadway and orient it the way you see here. So exactly, you can see, and if you wouldn't mind, if you could show what the existing road is. Kind of, yeah. So that was the existing road right there that we proposed. The planning board felt that there would be better kind of screening offered by moving the roadway. So we did that after the meeting, and then we had the subsequent concept plan meeting. They approved that approach. We went to the master plan, they approved it as well. So this is really the layout of the site. One of the things that, and you were at the site meeting, but both the applicant and I were at the site meeting, we marked out the entirety of the area that I talked about, that limit of work, and walked every single piece of it. And what the planning board and we believe was the case is it's an extremely well buffered property. Extremely dense vegetation. It's difficult to walk through, let alone see through. So in my experience, compared to sites that I've worked on, it's extremely well buffered with existing vegetation. What's being proposed is the reorientation of the roadway as it comes in, and then in addition, you'll see a darker green area. That area, because they've asked us to, if we would have gone in there, we wouldn't have to clear the area where the road is. But because we're going to not use the existing roadway, what we're proposing to do is revegetate that area, and you'll see that there's vegetation proposed on our plans. So that dark green area is going to be revegetated. The other thing that you'll see is some lighter green areas, and those areas are necessary in order to get the equipment initially in to be able to build the array. Once it's built, it's really, this site is just accessed probably quarterly to maybe semi-annual, a couple of times a year. These aren't sites where people go in and do heavy maintenance, so there'll be pickup trucks or personal vehicles that will be coming in. So the roadway will be reduced once the construction project is completed.
I'm sorry to
Sure.
interrupt, can I ask,
Please.
that light green area, that's where you're saying that vehicles are coming in, what's there now?
There's some kind of low scrub vegetation that's currently there.
So there's no mature 50-foot trees
No.
or anything, it's just,
No, right where those are, no.
okay.
No, and again, that was specifically,
That would be
Directed
destroyed
by the
probably
planning board.
from the truck traffic, but then replaced? Is that what
Yes.
you're talking about, replacing?
yeah, what we're gonna do initially is we'll have some gravel that's gonna be in there in order to, make sure that we don't have erosion of, the soil.
Okay.
So there'll be gravel initially, and then it'll be revegetated, and then ultimately, the entirety of this parcel will be vegetated. So we'll come in, lumen seeded, so it'll be a vegetated site, including the areas you see that are light green. There's a fence going around the entirety of the property. You'll see some wetlands, and they're on the right side of the boundary, exactly. Sorry. They're on the right side of the property, eastern side of the property. Those areas have been delineated, actually Mr. McHugh will testify, delineated the wetlands. We're not proposing any work within the wetlands, but we're proposing work near the wetlands. So as part of that, we do a preliminary, and he'll talk more about it, but we ultimately submit a permit to ride them to make sure that they approve the project essentially and what's being proposed. That's already been submitted to them. We're hoping to have we submitted it over a month ago. We're hoping to have it tonight, but I called and so far we don't have it.
Can you define near the wetlands, approximately how many feet?
That we're from the wetlands?
Yes.
Yeah, we're outside the buffer zone. So we're outside the 50-foot buffer zone, but we're in close proximity. In the lower areas, you can see that we're working within the buffer zone. So on the eastern side, we're not. There'll be some clearing that's on the southern side. As part of constructing solar arrays, you can't have them shaded, so there'll be some clearing in there. But again, none of the work will be in it. On the eastern side will be outside the buffer. In the other area will be, you can see the line that's going along. I I think that's, maybe one other thing, the actual panels themselves are, a little less than 10 feet, so not particularly high. There are some that we've used that are higher, but about 10 feet would be the max height, and certainly something that we, would be consistent with. And maybe the last thing here is there's an existing buffer, vegetated buffer that will remain in place. We'll talk about the buffer zones later as part of the criteria. The minimum is 20 feet, and what we're proposing is 30 feet. So we're going to maintain a 30-foot buffer as part of the design of the project. So I think with that, unless there's any questions about this, I think that we do want to walk through some of the specific criteria for you. If there's any questions regarding the array, I don't know how familiar you are with these, but I don't want to go too long.
I don't have a specific question about the array, the fencing. What type of fencing is that going to be? How high?
Yeah, so 7-foot fencing is what we're proposing around the entirety of the project.
What type of fencing? Chain link fencing?
Chain link fencing.
Okay.
Any other questions on layout, what we're proposing?
Well, this is kind of, not so much a clue, it's out there. As far as monitoring things like vandalism, with any kind of video equipment on the property.
Yeah. So there's no video equipment as part of this. Like I said, I've been involved in a dozen that have been constructed, and of the dozen that I work on, we continue to be involved in those projects. And so far, none of those projects that I've experienced any vandalism. If someone's here from Nexamp, they involved in them, or they have sites that they would run. So it hasn't something that's come up on any of the projects we've worked on. You've got a 7-foot fence. It's a pretty significant fence. People or kids can get through anything, so I mean, you can get over a 7-foot fence, but you're really going to be trying to get in there. The panels are very durable. I've seen them hit with baseball bats, so it's not something from a damage standpoint. So it really hasn't been, at least in my experience, an issue regarding the projects.
Speaking to your experience with these, just concentrating on the 12 projects that you've worked on that have been through the approval project and
Sure.
constructed,
Yeah.
how many of those have been in commercial areas versus rural areas versus like densely populated areas?
Kind of all over. Let's see, North Smithfield, we're starting a construction project. It's in a rural area, probably similar to this. We're in a permitting, well, let's say I'll stick with the ones that are being built. Exeter, Rhode Island is one that's on a kind of major roadway, so that's right on a roadway. A smaller one, I think at the 0.5 megawatt. Johnston, Rhode Island, we did one larger than this, almost 3 times larger than this. And that one is in a residential neighborhood, so we're directly across from houses. So there's houses across the street from us. Let's see, I can keep it. Middletown, Rhode Island, we did one. It was partially kind of almost like the dog daycare, partially in a business park, but on the other side of it, there were residential houses, kind of bordered, but not quite in Newport. Let's see, Richmond, we did one with Nexamp. That project is in kind of a residential, sort of low-density area, somewhat like this. Concord, Massachusetts, it's on a landfill, but
Where
it's...
in Massachusetts?
Concord, Massachusetts. That's on a landfill. It's right number 2 at Walden Pond. Keep going. Adams, Massachusetts.
No, I mean, I just, generally,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether or
Just-
not
yeah,
a lot of them have been in, because
yeah.
I've seen them, by the Mass Pike, and, those seem to be larger, like, commercial type.
The ones on the Mass Pike, those are small. The
Looks
ones on the
big
Mass
to me.
Pike, yeah, the ones on the Mass Pike are probably third of a megawatt, 0.5 megawatt, something like that. So
So
those are,
this, what is being proposed here would be 3 times that size.
yeah, and there's a number of them, so I'm not sure exactly what. Some are larger, some are smaller.
Yeah.
Like I said, of the ones I've done 6 megawatts. It's probably more typical size these days. 2, 1 is, again, I understand. I'm speaking in commercial solar, not anything else other than that. And again, you'll see one there. I think it was not Richmond, but right next door. There was one that was approved, I think, 35 megawatts, and we're working on one at West Greenwich that's 40 megawatts. So there really isn't a standard. Where are they? Because they're really in a variety of places.
They're just kind of in a variety.
I have a question from a safety standpoint. The entry road, the new proposed entry road.
Yes.
What type of a angle or degree from Lewis Farm up that hill? In regards to emergency vehicles?
Do you mean a slope?
Slope, yes.
Yeah, it's relatively minor, of 6% or something like
Okay.
that.
And the width of the road will be maintained at what?
12, what is it, 20? Yeah, 20, yeah. So these will be 20 feet. So
Okay. Accessibility in there for fire apparatus. Is there a turnaround in there so we don't have to back down the driveway, or is there a place that we can do that?
yeah, within the, and, you know, I think we've had meetings with the fire department. What we've done is we've laid out a turnaround at the end here. This isn't, within the facility, it's not set up for fire truck to go within this roadway and go into the facility. So access would be outside the facility.
That's fine.
Yeah, but within here, you know, it should accommodate that.
Thank you.
Sure. So what I tried to do is just give you a sense of what we're doing. So as we get to some of the criteria, I know you've got questions and other things that are associated with solar, but at least that sets the stage for what we're doing. So
At this time, I'm going to direct some questions to Mr. Benavides, which are pertinent to the solar ordinance. So these are issues related to that special section that you have in front of you, 2131, and we're just going to walk through those together. The first one, Mr. Benavides, deals with design standards, and this is a large paragraph in the zoning ordinance which talks about a lot of things that the Planning Commission had us go through, and these are conditions that are in the Planning Commission's master plan approval. This is one of those overlapping areas I mentioned earlier that it's kind of hard to understand who has a jurisdiction over these things. But just to go through it, it talks about having a site layout and landscape changes presented. We've gone through that this evening. The diagram of electrical components, description of the major systems of the components. These are all things that were submitted to the Planning Commission and reviewed by them from a construction standpoint. Operation maintenance plans, we offered testimony there. The decommission plan, we have to submit that at the next level of approval. Utility approval, we talked to the Planning Commission about that. That's something that we will eventually get and have to have, but we can't get it until we get the approvals from the town. Proof of liability insurance would be something that we would have to have in place before we could get a building permit. Contract information from the contractors. We don't have contractors yet. We can't do that until we get our approvals. And then it says additional documents which may be required by the planning board. Well, we know what they want. It's in their decision. So we've covered all of the design standards. I don't know if you have any particular questions from a design standpoint for Mr. Benavides. If you do, we could pause here and he could address them.
Members have any?
Okay, moving on to the next criteria, it's called land evidence. This requires a memorandum of lease to be filed in the land evidence records, and it was filed last week. So we have a copy of the specific issues and terms of the lease between the company and the property owners, the Pettigrews, who own the entire 133 acres, of which we're going to be using a small portion of it, and that's on record now. Mr. Benavides, setbacks and heights. The applicant is not seeking any relief from variances or dimensional regulations. Everything that we're asking for is permitted and is designed in a way that's in compliance with all of the dimensional regulations. Isn't that correct?
correct.
And the facility can be constructed in compliance with Rhode Island State Building Code and the Rhode Island State Electrical Code. Isn't that correct?
It is, and if I could just go back one just for a second. One of the criteria in the setback and height is the requirement there be a 20-foot vegetative buffer. We worked with both the planning board and the applicant and agreed to go from a 20-foot buffer to a 30-foot buffer, so we increased it by 50%.
The ordinance requires that the electrical connection and distribution lines with installation shall be underground or located entirely within the structure, and they may be connected to utility above ground if required by the utility. Could you please explain to the board the interaction between your solar array and utility companies, how the power gets to them, what the lines look like, and how the electricity is sold, just to sort of educate the board? This is something I think a lot of people are curious about.
Sure. Well, first of all, to maybe directly answer what's put here, everything within the solar array, all the electrical connections are underground. So the work that we're doing within the array, all the interconnections, it's almost, and these panels are almost like a lifetime Christmas tree. They all are strung in a string, and if one goes out, then the others in that string go out. They're connected up to connectors, and they ultimately end up to the point where they go into a single point at the system. It's ultimately going to go to feed National Grid. Once it gets to the point where it leaves the array and is going to be accepted by National Grid, that's really established by National Grid. They determine what has to happen. It's always telephone poles. It's typically 3. It's above ground line, so it'll come up out of ground. It'll run in probably 3 poles that'll connect and bring it into National Grid's system. What happens with the electricity is it's virtual net metering, so it's not powering a particular entity, but it's going back into the grid to ultimately, supply Rhode Island with energy. And what it does is credits meters, so it provides a credit on a meter rather than supplying that house or that house or that house. So that's how the energy leaves. It goes to National Grid, and they establish the contract with ultimately Coventry Solar LLC / Nexamp to be able to get that credit from the energy generation. So bottom line is everything on the ground except for what's at the road is determined by National Grid, and it's because we go into their system to feed the Rhode Island system.
At this point in time, does Nexamp or Coventry Solar have an interconnection agreement with National Grid to buy the power?
Yes, they do.
It's already in place?
Correct.
The 3 poles you were talking about, is that gonna take the power back to Lewis Farm and take it out to Route 117?
It'll take it out to 117.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, ultimately, it doesn't go to a destination, it
No,
just goes into
It
the...
goes back into the wires.
Exactly,
That's why they call it the grid.
that's right. That's right.
So the power doesn't need to be carried to the substation at Indian Trail?
No,
No. And you said there were 3 lines that are going to be, 3 poles that are going to be above ground? Is that an estimation? Is that?
this one happens to be 4 poles.
4 poles, and it's going to be on the property that's owned by the Pettigrews? The poles are going to be inside that property line?
Correct.
Are they visible from the street?
Okay, now,
Yeah, they probably would be visible from the street. Yeah, it ties into the street, so at some point, it's at the edge of the street, so yes, it would be visible from the
Will
street.
be visible.
And it really is, it's a sort of non-negotiable. They establish it, it has to be above ground based upon their criteria.
So it's all the underground stuff is flowing to those 4 poles above ground?
Correct. Everything within the fencing area is going to be underground, and then it'll ultimately come up out of the ground, go to those 4 poles, and tie into the street, into the existing electrical system that's there.
Okay, and jumping off that, and going back to a question I forgot to ask, that road that's going in, that planning has suggested as opposed to the other entrance. I know the road going through the panels is going to be gravel.
Mhm.
What about the other road?
Correct.
Is
Yes.
it paved or that's
No.
gravel as well?
Gravel as well. Yeah, no pavement is part of the project.
there's no transformers on site?
Yes, there'll be a transformer on site.
Now, will that transformer give off any noise or anything?
No, and I think one of the things we're going to do is walk through all, if the board would like us to do that, we'll walk through all of the criteria. The noise is very low. Essentially, it's the equivalent of, and I probably should wait on the criteria, but equivalent of a house band. I've been to a number of these after we've constructed. We'll get into noise again if you like, but we've got a significant buffer here. We're over 150 feet from any of the properties, or the closest property is 150 feet. I'm confident that the noise from a transformer, which is similar to what you're familiar with in transformers, will not be audible at the closest abutting location.
Do we have a location, I'm sorry if I wasn't paying attention, is there a particular location where the transformer is going to be located?
Yes.
Right there at the
I
top
didn't
of the
see you.
panel?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so he
very astutely pointed it out.
So that
it's-
blank space there
exactly.
next to that first row of panels.
That's right.
The next criteria is security. It requires that a fence has to surround the perimeter of the installation of no less than 6 feet in height. We've already heard testimony that it's going to be 7 feet. Emergency access, reasonable accessibility for emergency vehicle services shall be required. In your opinion, is there adequate ability for rescue vehicles to get into the site? And
Yes, there are.
the applicant has discussed this with the acting fire chief of the Western Coventry Fire District. And he has also approved this and is satisfied with the layout, the design, accessibility, and has asked that a special lockbox be put on the lock so that the fire department can get into it if they needed to. And also wants to make sure that the applicant will train members of the fire department on any issues that may be specific to this type of an operation, and the applicant has agreed to provide that special training. Isn't that correct?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Can you describe any signs that will be built at the site?
There'll be no signage in terms of, what you would typically think of a sign demonstrating, who owns or any of those things. There will likely be some small signs in terms of no trespassing and some of those things associated with electrical type projects, but it won't be a sign.
Are there any lights associated with the site?
No lights proposed.
And we've already talked about the decommissioning idea, that if the site stopped operating, then there would have to be a bond posted to guarantee that the operator would remove everything and restore the property to its existing condition. That is something that the planning board will not allow us to go forward without presenting to them when we come back with a preliminary plan, and we will be doing that. The next criteria is land clearing and deforestation. I have an environmental scientist that will be addressing that issue when he testifies. So those are all of the issues in your solar ordinance. At this time, we can jump over to the other requirements that are your general special use requirements, and this is where we will get into the industrial performance standards, and this might be a good time to jump into those. Those are the issues like glare, heat, hazardous materials, and all of those things. So Alan, would you like to walk through that on your own right now and address those?
The industrial standards?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. So what I'm looking at is Article 7, and it's called Industrial Performance Standards. What I'll do is walk through these. I'll try to do them quickly, but at least touch on some of the things that are identified here. The first one is noise. We spoke about that. Again, we've got a transformer that you're familiar with. It's equivalent of a house fan with significant vegetative buffer that exists, at least 30 feet dense of dense vegetative buffer. So in my opinion, this will not be audible at the 150-foot zone, and I've been out to projects like this, and that's my experience that that's the case. The next criteria is vibrations, and there's nothing, and one of the questions are asked, some typically not part of the country, they will rotate or oscillate depending on where the sun is. In New England, almost all of them are stationary, they don't move, they're fixed. So there's no vibration that's going to be proposed as part of this project. Smoke and particulate matter, obviously there's nothing that would generate those activities. Odorous matter, there's nothing that would generate odors for this. Performance standards for glare. Obviously that's the one that comes up in most of these hearings. And one of the things about solar panels is they're designed to absorb sun. They're not designed to reflect sun. The whole point of having a panel is for the efficiency of being able to convert that to electricity. Panels are typically less than 2% of it is reflective. And to give people a sense of what that means, it's similar to water as an example, glass as an example, except less so. So when you think of your windows or whatever you see of houses or whatever, solar panels are less than that because, again, the purpose is to absorb sun. The other thing is what's being proposed here is anti-reflective coating on the panels. So again, eliminates or minimizes there's nothing that doesn't have reflectivity. Everything has reflectivity. But at least in my opinion, and being involved in these projects, it's relatively low and is not going to be an impact here. And particularly given the fact that the ability to see these is extremely low. You look at the site, and there's vegetation around the entirety of it, 30 feet of vegetation. If you can't see the panels, then you're not going to see the glare. So I think you mentioned earlier that they're on the Mass Pike, they're on highways, they're on airports. These are something that people have become sort of knowledgeable of what glare is, and I think you've seen them on the Pike. They're not something that Turnpike authorities are going to put on the highway if they felt that it would be impactful, at least in my opinion. Heat, there's no significant source of heat there. I think there's heat sink, which is mentioned in your regulations. That's really not associated with these projects, in my opinion. There's no airborne toxics, no gases, no fumes that are being generated as part of these projects. There's no wastewater, so unlike houses or other other sites where you have some kind of wastewater generation, that's not part of these projects. There are no radioactive materials proposed as part of these projects. Fire and explosive hazards, as we testified earlier, it's also been reviewed by the fire department, and they're comfortable with the project as presently designed. I don't think we mentioned it, but we obviously have to go back to the planning board. There's still 2 stages of review. We went through master, we still have preliminary and final to do, so there's still 2 steps in that process, but work with the fire department. The last one I'll touch on is hazardous materials, and there was significant testimony as part of the planning board process. And ultimately, first of all, one of the criteria in your bylaws is that there be no hazardous materials stored there or generated there. That's not the case for solar panels. But as far as the panels themselves, we have an exhibit that we'd like to present. Oh no, this is the, is it attached? Who do I give this to? Okay. So what we provided is a study. It's done by Canadian Solar. It's the likely provider of panels. It may not be the provider of panels, but it's the likely provider of panels. Typically what happens is the time you start a project and the time you actually construct a project can be, I think in this case, it's 2 years. So anyway, there's a long time that goes during that process. Sometimes there's switch in terms of efficiencies and what sort of the performance standards. But at this point, the Canadian Solar is a likely provider. In addition, this is very typical of ultimately panels. So there's nothing unique about these panels other than they use their ability to have efficient energy generation. And that I hear concerns that people talk about that there's bleaching or chemicals or whatever. And as far as all the experience that I have, that study that generates it, what they did is they did leachability studies. So they ran water through panels, really to address the issue because they're trying to sell panels. They hear this. And what that demonstrates is when they did that, and what they look at is what the water that comes out after leaching these panels is ultimately non-detect for any of the heavy metals, any of the other things that people talk about. So they aren't building them with heavy metals or contaminants. And in my opinion, that would not be a concern. And really, they're building them all over Rhode Island. They're building them all over the country. I don't think they're being built as a source for contamination throughout the United States. And I think it's been demonstrated. We gave you one example of the tests that were done to demonstrate that. I think that's it.
Are there any questions on the industrial performance standards? I know that's a topic that usually generates interest, so I think we've covered that well. At this time, we will jump into your other special use criteria, and I'll ask Mr. Benedetti some questions. We've already talked about ingress and egress to the lot, and you've testified that there's sufficient ability for the vehicles that need to get into the site to be able to get in and out. Isn't that correct? Do you anticipate there being any conflict with vehicles on the site and any pedestrians that might be working, doing maintenance work or anything on the site?
No, I do not.
And is there any off-street parking requirements?
No, as I said earlier, these are visited typically every 6 months, maybe every 3 occasionally, so there's no need for parking.
And is there any need for any type of trash or storage facilities on the site?
No.
And with regard to screening and buffering, is the screening and buffering that the Planning Commission approved, and that has been approached with the project consistent with Article 17 of the town zone ordinance.
Yes.
And we've already talked about signs and lighting. Is there any required yards or open space under the ordinances that you're aware of that haven't been satisfied?
No, I believe we're consistent with all of them.
Compatibility with surrounding lots, we will have our real estate experts touch on that one. The industrial performance standards we've already talked about. Consistency with the comprehensive plan, we'll have our real estate expert testify on that one. So the last question then would be, in your opinion, as a professional engineer and as the project matter, will this grant of a special use permit result in any condition inimical to the public health, safety, morals, or welfare of the community, in your opinion?
It will not result in any of those conditions.
I don't have any other questions for Mr. Benavides, but he will remain available.
I think it has a simple question. When you get snow,
Pardon me?
when you get snow,
Yes.
does somebody need to go out there and clear the panels off?
No. It's interesting is it's an evolving industry, and you know, what you do is you sort of see what happens over the years. Initially, there was a concern that would be the case. But a couple of things. One, when snowing, there typically isn't the sunlight, and energy generation is the time of year when it's in peak performance. They melt quickly, so you know there's no reason to go out there and clear them. It just isn't worth the effort of doing it, and it goes quickly. That was a concern in the beginning, how often we have to go out there, and the answer is not at all.
And do you have to clean the panels on an annual basis?
No, it's rainwater essentially, and that's a good point, and as I mentioned it earlier, is that there's no, first of all, they don't go out and wash them, so they aren't using chemicals or anything to wash the panels, and also there's no pesticides or fertilizers or anything that are used as part of the project for the sort of the life of the project. So you know, sometimes it's conditions that are put on by boards, but no hazardous chemicals, no need to wash them. Really, they're also remotely monitored, so the ability to check the performance of the system is done. You don't have to go there with a meter and check it, but you review it. So there's not a lot of reasons to go there. They operate, they generate energy with the sun, and they're kind of self-sustaining.
How high off the ground are they?
Like I said, it's about 10 feet, so about that high.
With regard to snow removal, what about the roadway? It's gravel. Who's responsible for maintenance of the roadway, and how do you clear a gravel road without destroying it and having to replace it?
Gravel roads are pretty common, I would imagine. I would think someone here must have a gravel driveway, but I could be wrong. But anyway, you know, it's plowing, but you know, if there isn't a reason to go in, they're not plowing it. Ultimately,
But shouldn't it be kept open for fire safety? And
yeah. You know, I don't know that it's something that's typically. Yeah. It's so I guess the answer is it's not something that we're typically plowing at all. If there's a reason to go in, they usually use four-wheel drive. We don't get that much snow in this area.
What about emergency equipment?
I don't think so.
Like emergency equipment, like say for some reason, you know, not any malfunction of the solar panels or anything like that, but a fire truck needs to get down that road. If there is snow in New England, if the road is blocked,
Yeah.
that blocks the access of emergency
Yeah.
vehicles. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that there's access to that site?
Yeah. I guess what I'd say is we've gone over this with the fire department. They're comfortable with the layout of this. If that's a concern regarding it, we certainly can work with the fire department, but it hasn't been a need in any of the projects that we've been involved in plowing in the wintertime.
But you're testifying that there's no problem with ingress and egress. If there's snow that's blocking a roadway and access needs to be to those panels, I kind of see a problem. And I can appreciate that you work with the fire department, but if there's a fire emergency of some sort, kids, anything, somebody, puts a fire pit in the middle of it, they can't get in, That poses a big problem to the safety of the surrounding homes that you're testifying is 150 feet away at any one point.
If we can, let's back the train up a little bit so that he can get on the rails here and deal with the question. Let's start with how often the maintenance people go to the site.
As I said earlier, every 3 to 6 months, probably closer to 6.
And do they need to get in on a regular basis during the winter months?
They shouldn't. So,
Okay. And then could you describe for the board, because it's a legitimate question, the nature of any type of fire hazards that are generated by the solar array?
Typically, you know, again, in my experience, fire hazard has not been an issue with solar panels. I'm aware of none of them that have caught on fire. There's rooftops that have caught on fire that have had solar panels on them, but in terms of ground mount, there really isn't the fire issue that I'm aware of. And again, speaking with the fire department, I think they felt similar regarding
Well,
this.
I'm not so much concerned with the solar panels spontaneously igniting.
Mhm.
I'm concerned with vandalism.
I was going there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna cover that one too. So the 7-foot fence is for security purposes, is that correct?
Yes,
And it's locked with a gate,
correct.
and the area that is out there is an area where there are, for I think everyone would testify, people who are good citizens, and the area is well protected, and the people have good children who behave, and you're not aware of any hazards in the area where children might be attracted to this site to do any type of vandalism or anything like that? I mean, it's impossible to predict everything.
Right.
But when we talk about the realism of where we are in the neighborhood and the surrounding areas, there's nothing to suggest that the people out there have kids that are problematic that you're aware of.
That's correct.
And the fire chief is concerned most about hazards that would happen when maintenance people are out there working on the site and constructing things. That's when there's more likely to be some sort of a personal injury where we need rescue vehicles. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, the roadway certainly would be open and accessible during the installation, and it would be open and accessible during maintenance because the maintenance people would have to get in.
Correct in all of those.
And on top of that, if the fire department wants it to be cleared in the wintertime and establishes that there's a need to it, the applicant will work with the fire department to make sure that the zoning board member's concern is addressed.
Yes.
I just had another question that went out of my head. I'm sorry, I don't mean to prolong things, but,
How are you?
I'm sure I'll think of it when someone else is talking.
Just a point of interest, the fire department has a service vehicle with a plow. We take the most emergent, I'm a member of the Western Coventry Fire Department, also a training officer up there. The acting chief and I have discussed this, and I will tell you that snow impacted roads didn't come up in the conversation, but it can certainly be addressed one way or the other. So, I mean, brings up a good point.
Yeah,
Now, if there's 4 feet of snow on the ground, we're not going to have a fire.
Yeah, so we'd be glad to, you know, work with you to make sure that that's addressed.
Is there a plan in place for maintenance of the roads otherwise, like, gravel washing away, winter snow taking it,
Yeah, the roads are pretty durable, but ultimately there's maintenance. There's a O&M plan that was submitted as part of the planning board process. That was one of the items. So there is maintenance, they're cutting the grass. They need to cut the grass to make sure that the panels aren't shaded, because if the panels are shaded, then the panels don't work. So grass mowing, road maintenance, those kind of things are part of the project for the duration.
Thank you.
You keep saying the phrase "for the duration." What is the proposed duration of this project?
20. Yeah. So there's typically different, so you're going to ask the applicant, there's different durations. They're almost always 20, this one is 20. And there's sometimes options to have it continue, but it'll be a minimum of 20 years.
And is this phase 1 or is this the final project?
It's a final project.
I remember what my question was.
Oh, okay.
How often is this grass mowing? Because you're saying that people go out twice a year, every 6 months.
Yeah.
Is the grass mowing, is that something that's regular, or that's part of a different thing, like
Couple of things. One of them is what we use is a sort of a grass that's tailored to solar arrays, so it tends to be slow growing, and it tends to grow outward instead of growing upward. So we pick a grass species that minimizes that. There could be times during the year, maybe in the springtime, as I said, we might go quarterly rather than the semi-annual. Quarterly is probably the minimum. If there's issues, they could go there more often for some occasion, if for some reason, they had an issue. But again, typically it's 3 to 6 months. And again, it's it's, as soon as the panel is even slightly shaded by grass, it shuts down not only that panel, but all the panels in the string. So it really, and they can tell because they can see that the performance of the system remotely is being impacted. So, you know, it maybe it's as often as 3 months during the spring, but you might cut at the beginning of the spring, maybe come back sometime summer, that might be 3 or 4 months later, but they're incredibly infrequent visits.
And is it Nexamp that is performing these maintenance, or who does the?
Yeah.
It's Nexamp?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you said that's for 20 years?
Yeah, yeah.
So if these panels are 10 feet off the ground, how much of an impact is grass? I mean, how can grass be shaded?
That's the high part. So they're at an angle.
Okay.
So when they come down at the angle, they start from the high point, go to the line. They're about at a 20 to 25 degree angle, and it would be the lower area. So, you know,
And how low is below it? What's the height there?
did you go 3 feet? They differ. Every project we do has different parameters. So this one happens to be 3 feet. So, you know, grass could get that high if you let it grow long enough, but it takes a while, particularly for the grass species that we use, to get to a 3 foot height.
I know that the people in the audience are going to raise an issue. I might as well address it while he's up here to save everyone some time. I want you to describe the anchoring system that's used to connect the panels to the ground. Talk about how they get engineered at the time that you ask for a building permit. And talk about the stability, the strength, the depth of the poles, how the poles work, and whether or not there's a possibility for any sort of high-intensity wind to take one of these solar panels and rip it off the staging and blow it somewhere and cause injury.
Sure. So you've got the panels. The panels are put on a rack. And again, the rack has several rows, and the rack is anchored by 2 posts. And the posts will be driven into the ground, and that is the means in which they're held. But what you do is you drive those posts in a sufficient length in order to be able to resist the wind force associated with a hurricane force wind. As part of the, once we get through the permitting and the planning and zoning, as part of the building permit process and the electrical permit process, there's structural engineers that will go through and take the information, so we know that there's an embedment length, that's the depth that the posts go into. Between 4 to 8 feet is typical. What they do is they'll come out, they do what's called pull tests, in establishing what the resistance to pull those posts are, specifically at this site. And they'll do it at multiple locations at the site in order to determine its ability, the soil's ability to resist the wind force. And then using that information, and again, as part of the full submittal going to building, get the building permit, that will be designed as part of it. It has to be designed for hurricanes, force winds, and those are the things that are demonstrated during the building permit process. So what's being proposed here is exactly what's shown in the plans. Depending on how high the panels are, depending on the width of the panels, the wind force could change, so it's very specific. Each site we do is a little bit different in terms of those parameters. Tilt angle can be different, but all those things are part of the design process and will be approved as part of the building permit process, electrical permit process for the electrical design as part of construction.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to call Joe McHugh and have him sworn in, the witness.
Please give your full name and address.
Joe McHugh, MCCUE, Mason and Associates, North Situate, Rhode Island.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in front of this board?
I do.
Mr. McHugh, what is your occupation?
I'm a senior environmental scientist at Mason and Associates.
And what kind of educational background do you have?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Rhode Island in Soil and Water Resources.
And do you have any licenses?
Our field doesn't require licenses, but I have a number of certifications.
And what are those?
I'm a professional wetland scientist with the National Society of Wetland Scientists.
And do you appear before the Department of Environmental Management as an expert witness?
I submit a lot of applications, and I have numerous meetings with supervisors at DEM.
And have you testified before permitting boards before?
Yes, I have.
Do you have a copy of your resume?
I do.
And could you hand that to the clerk?